Hi there, it's me, Lincoln Law, sexual deviant and also your favourite author. Uh, my book, Nestled with the Nameless One, came out today. That's pretty exciting, right? I thought, as a celebration, I would read you the first chapter. So settle in, grab yourself a cup of tea, and get ready for the beautiful dulcet tones of an author reading his own book. Chapter 1. Wrong place, wrong time. The priest bellowed my name when selecting the sacrifice for the Nameless One, which was a shame, because I'd hoped they'd choose Brian. It was a bad thought to have, but who hadn't imagined their ex dead at some point or another? I just didn't want to die, and I wanted my bread dish back. Now Brian would get to keep my bread dish, and I would get to die. It just didn't seem fair. I was not part of the cult of the Nameless One. I had got chatting to the wrong people at the tavern that night. While the cold wind howled outside and thunder rolled off in the southern sea, I went to the tavern for a pint and a bite to eat, and ended up drugged and in a basement somewhere. But the cult of the Nameless One was a big part of the town, and I should have twigged at the empty streets and quiet tavern that something inquietus was afoot. On the floor of the basement, they tied my hands, gagged me, and blindfolded me. I struggled against the fetters, but whatever drugs they had put in my drink left my muscles weak and wasted. I was like a bug in the hands of a curious child. "You won't get away with this," I huffed through the gag, though it sounded more like humming. "Oi, your holiness," said one of my captors, the big dumb one who'd been drinking a dark stout while insisting that licking frogs could cure syphilis. "This one's heavier than normal. We might need more hands to carry him." "Well, go on then," the priest said. "Get your hands round him." There was a grunt, and a mess of hands and shuffling, and the group had me off the ground and on their shoulders. As we ascended the stairs and stepped out onto street level, they bumped my head on the lintel, insult to injury at this point. The next thing I knew, I was on a boat. I could tell it was a boat by the way it rocked in the Craddock-on-Sea harbour, and the groaning of the bow. Sea salt settled hard on my palate, while the pressure of the storm made my sinuses hurt. Like an unwanted watery invasion, rain seeped into my gag and blindfold. I heard them call to set sail, untie the ropes, and push the boat off the dock. The cold soaked deeper into my skin, and I shivered as the ship broke free of the harbour's protections and sailed out into the rocky waters. The cold of the Nameless One only set sail into wild waters when the need was there. Also, according to their priest, the Nameless One, the eldritch beast to which I would be sacrificed, demanded his feast. Or perhaps it was his feast. Capital H. I was not sure if the capitalized H applied to just the biblical god or elder gods too. The portents were as mysterious and without answer as the questions I had. Why it had to happen now? Why it had to be me? They chose a woman for the sacrifice in most instances, but with the township running thin on women, I guess they had to start on the rough agenda at some point. I wondered for a time who would remember me. Would my disappearance be noteworthy as one of the few males? Or would the news exist for a day and all would move on, like it usually went? The latter felt likely. Waves started beating high and heavy against the bow. I felt the air around me change. The boat's movements went from shaky rocking to grand sweeping motions across the rough surface of the sea. Whoever was at the wheel, though, steered us expertly through the rough conditions. For the first time in my life, I was disappointed with a boatman's competence. Dying by drowning was meant to be peaceful, and preferable given the situation. I had read books on black holes describing the process by which a black hole would consume matter. It stretched you out and pulled you into something infinitely dense, maybe spitting you out at the other end. How long would I live once I was in the Nameless One's gullet, past the event horizon, or at least the uvula? The sound of routine chaos continued until the rhythm changed. The boat sounded less battered, the storm weakened, and the scamper of footsteps was replaced by calm treading. We must have arrived in the bay of Welly's Island. Travelling out from Craddock Harbour, Welly's Island was not the first island you would cross, but the second, assuming you could see any of it through the fog which always covered it. It was crescent-shaped, a mirrored twin to the harbour we had left. A beacon on the Craddock lighthouse should have been visible through the mist, but I had no chance of seeing it while blindfolded, and even less chance of ever getting back to it. A thump of wood upon wood announced our arrival on the jetty. My captors grabbed me from the wet floor of the boat, the engine idling in the background as the storm continued its wailing. The jetty creaked as they threw me onto it. Rotten wood bowed beneath my weight, creaking, then thumping, booted footsteps. Another rough manhandling up, a quiet, "Stop knocking him around," from the priest. And then the procession started. Attending one's own sacrifice, bound and blindfolded as I was, felt like a very inactive thing to do. For something so monumental, you would think I would have a more active participation in it. But from here, it was a case of not wriggling too much and hoping for fewer low ceilings to avoid concussion. "Try not to move your head," said the priest, his breath hot on my ear. "It gets a little dicey once we enter the atrium, and we don't want to get that blindfold slipping off." Keys jangled, a heavy door creaked, and we were out of the weather. It was still cold, the air musty, but at least it wasn't raining on me anymore. Instead, the stillness allowed me to steep in the cold. My skin prickled with goosebumps, my teeth chattered, and my body shivered. "Get him dried up and presentable," the priest said. "We can't have him smelling like wet dog before the Nameless One." The group laughed at the joke, but I completely missed it. They were careful around my face as they rubbed dry my hair, my cheeks, and around my neck. The rest of my body they were a bit more slapdash with. They took my clothes from me, dried me off, and then placed me in some sort of billowy robe. The robes were not warm, but they were at least dry, and that made up for a lot. My imagination conjured images of something light and flowing, probably white with gold trim, perhaps slightly feminine. Come to think of it, being the first man in the cult's history felt like a bit of an oversight. Surely the cult had sent a man at some point in its millennia-long history. I wasn't the first. There had to be another. But when people went missing, when the cult named its sacrifice, the papers always announced a woman's name. Organ pipes bellowed their baleful tones. They boomed through what I presumed was the cult's church. "O Nameless One," a chorus of voices called out, "we sing to you, we call to you, we bow to you." They shuffled me onto a cold wooden seat, and a moment later they strapped me in, tying my hands with rough rope. Then those around me lifted me off the ground with a rush of air and a grunt of effort. A throne, perhaps? Or a palanquin? The organ's pipes and the voices wobbling continued while the group carried me down what felt like a dank staircase. I figured this out by the dripping on my face, the angle of my body, and the rhythmic stepping. Hope flickered in me like a guttering candle as I held on to it, desperately, that this awful dream would reveal itself to be false, that the nightmare would end. But every step, every echoed note from the organ, every chant from the cultists, served only as another nail in my coffin. I was going to die today. The procession came to a stop. The way the sound echoed, the way the air got cold and fresh, all of it signaled to me we had reached our destination. You could hear and feel the size of the space, even if you couldn't see it, from the way the very air changed. Echoes grew softer and more distant. A subtle howl of wind implied enormity. They settled down the palanquin. I felt a pair of steadying hands on my shoulders, which made my body shaking all the starker. "Be calm, my son," said the priest. "You will be gone soon, and all for the best of causes." His tone conjured a smile in my mind's eye, but not something genuine. He was smiling the sort of shit-eating grin I'd love to punch if I had any sort of coordination. "A parting gift," he said, placing something cold in my lap. If my hands were free, I would have touched it, but the feel of cold enamel and the little bumps on the bottom confirmed it was my bread dish. "They say you're meant to go in with something personal. Sorry, this is all we had at short notice." Damp fingers took the gag from my mouth. "Tell Brian I said thanks for returning it then." Perhaps he was present. Perhaps he was in the cult. I couldn't think of any other way for it to get to me. "And don't remove the eye mask, please," the priest reminded me. "Being eaten alive is not fun. Being eaten alive while insane is less so. Also, I presume." Footsteps retreated until the priest's voice called from the rear of the room, echoing through the cavern. "O Nameless One, we present this man to you as a sacrifice." I bumped a button. Please hold. I was doing so well. There we are. O Nameless One, we present this man for you as a sacrifice. This good man, Patrick Hummock. We call to you, we beg to you, show us mercy in exchange for this tribute. We feel your hunger, and we pray you will be satisfied. Snickers, from further up the stairs, left me somewhat disheartened. At least show some reverence for your sacrifice. We feel your hunger, the followers echoed in unison. Then a heavy door closed, and I was alone. The thickness of the walls and the weight of the glass muted the storm, assuming it still blew. The organ died out a short time later, the song reaching its conclusion in the deepest minor note I had ever heard. If there was a crack in the cave letting air in, it wasn't anywhere near me, as mustiness compounded in the space's stillness. I sat alone in the dark and cold for an interminable amount of time. Perhaps I'd freeze to death before the Nameless One ever got to me. If only they'd left me with a coat and not the bread dish. The frigidity of the place sank through to my core, setting my body to shivering. That was when I heard the first rumble. It didn't sound like a growl. Not at all animalistic or human, but something deeper and primal, like the growl of the ground before an earthquake or the crackling of thunder. Shuffles against the rock intermingled with other sounds, steps and movements making the passage sound alive. A scent of something sweet and rotting ascended. It washed over me in a cloud, forcing me to retch. My coughing almost drowned out the voice of the Nameless One. Though it spoke no words, I understood. I sensed intention. I felt the malice and the cruelty in them. A hissing sound like a snake, a sound like cracking twigs and then branches, the whoosh of air sucked from a space as it all folded in on itself. I felt the tug of the creature's gravity, and then something which I presumed was a tentacle passed just over my bound arm. How I knew its shape without seeing I couldn't quite place, but it felt right in my gut, like somehow the thoughts of this being were leading my mind in certain directions, filling in the gaps that my eyes could not fill. My skin touched empty space, but because he too existed in it, his presence expanded to fill, gaps and all. I sensed mist and leathery flesh, claw and bone, scale and horn. None of it seemed to make any sense together, and yet frightfully suited of being called the Nameless One. "Patrick Hummock," he said, the voice affected by a mouth meant for sounds of a higher state than human speech. It wasn't perfect, but the words were there. Something about the tone caught me off guard. Curiosity marked its words rather than hunger. "Nameless One?" I said. I... "You needn't speak, little man." Each sound was like a knife to the eardrum. It pierced through the ear, deep into my brain, hitting something deeper and more private than just grey matter. I heard lips being lipped, the drip of saliva on the ground. Bracing myself to be torn in two, I said one quiet goodbye to the world. He inhaled, air rushing past me like some great drop in pressure called it forth. I expected my seat to tip over, for my body to be dragged along the rough stone, for it all to end in some painful way. Something slick and long ran across the back of my arms and down to where they were bound. It felt about, seeming to test something around my arms, touching my skin, feeling for something I could not understand. The Nameless One grappled with the ties binding me there. Perhaps I was meant to slide into his maw when he breathed in. Only the fetters held me too tightly. This was him freeing my hands to make my end quicker, slipping them loose in a method that involved brief contact. They'd been so tight, and yet it seemed with barely a tap he had them undone. Despite my hands being free, however, I did not move. Every breath of air, a shallow, small thing in my chest. Was that fear? Or was it simply the fact that next to this elder god, I was infinitesimal? The Nameless One moved around me, his breathing now more recognizably, well, not human, but not quite something so nebulous as an entire galaxy taking a breath, as a black hole ripping the atmosphere in its void. One moment footsteps, then claws scraping on stone, and then the sound of folding paper. Sometimes it was like there were no steps to accompany the movement at all, but there was still the movement. Space warping around him, playing tricks on my senses. I remembered the bread dish in my lap. I grabbed it as if the bread dish was going to do me any good. It was heavy, so perhaps I could swing it and smack him over the head, or whatever a god had for a head. But with no line of sight, no way of knowing where he was, I would have tired myself out. Perhaps it was better not to struggle. A quick, an easy death. I knew where the door was, though. And the dish was heavy. The ropes around my ankles were undone slowly, the left first and then the right. A breath from the creature hitched as I felt it rise back up to full height. I sensed him before me, a pinprick pressure against my face, somewhere between my eyes. "Rise," a watery, thunderous voice commanded. I did so, my legs weak and shaking. At least I'll die on my feet. At least I'll die fighting. I took the momentum with me, gripping down on the bread dish with firm fingers. Lifting the bread dish up over my head, I cried out and brought it swinging down on the Nameless One's body, assuming I got the positioning right. But of course he was gone, too quick for me, and he took that pressure in my brain with him, withdrawing it like a needle. The bread dish slipped from my grasp and shattered against the rock. I reached my hand up to pull the blindfold off, to check where the dish had landed, but some force knocked my hand away. It didn't feel solid, but it felt present. The air around the force just distinct and different pressure and temperature altogether. "No." Again, the void spoke. I muttered quietly, "Okay," and lowered my hand. Something whisked me off the floor. It carried me elsewhere, wind whipping past my ears. At first I thought maybe there were arms carrying me, but just as I got the sense that there were arms there, that sensation changed. Something that felt like ropes around me came next, then ragged carapace, then claws, then it felt like I was dangling from some great toothy maw. We travelled for a while through tunnels and crevices, never getting stuck until he placed me on a damp floor. Perhaps he had taken me here to avoid getting blood in the atrium. Maybe he could hang me up to drain somewhere, like air-drying biltong or salting pork. How did eldritch beings prefer their meat, I wondered. Perhaps he would roast me first, make sure I was tender and hot before swallowing me, bones and all. The thought made me ill. Acid burned in my throat. "Sit," he said, voice gruff now, and as close to human as I had ever heard it uttered. I did so, folding my legs beneath me. A door creaked closed. For a moment I thought I was being locked in whatever this room was. Easier prey when I couldn't escape. But then the voice came from the other side of the door. "I will be back. You may remove your blindfold." I did so, preparing for a wave of insanity, for the trap to be sprung. None of that happened. I was alone in a room, with a single oil lamp beside me, and I was alive, whole, sane, and beside me was my bread dish, in one piece again. Thank you.